Welcome to the Purple Patch Sales Edge podcast with me, Danielle, and my amazing co-host, Lucy Lee. In today's episode, we have our very first special guest, and that is Cian McLaughlin, CEO of Trinity Perspectives and win-loss specialist. Make sure you listen to all of this podcast. There are so many wonderful insights, and remember to wait all the way till the end where we take all of the tactical things and advice and recommendations that Cian brings that you can implement immediately. Good morning. Good morning, Lucy, and good morning to Cian. So, Cian, you are our first guest on the Purple Patch Sales Edge podcast, our first guest. And so what I thought I'd do is a quick introduction to Cian. So for everybody that is listening, we have invited the wonderful Cian McLaughlin to our podcast today. So Cian is the founder and CEO of Trinity Solutions. He has an incredible career, which I'm sure he'll talk a little bit about today, holding some really senior roles in a number of the largest global IT providers, including brands such as SAP and Cognos. He's the author of the Amazon bestseller, Rebirth of a Salesman. There hasn't been a follow-up book yet, though. That might come up as a question. He also has an incredible sales blog, and that has been selected as one of the top 50 sales blogs in the world, by the way, for the 7th year running by Top Sales World magazine. You'll regularly see him actually on a lot of sales and marketing commentary that he does across mainstream media, as well as does quite a lot of events for some names you might know, such as Salesforce. He ends up at World Tour quite often. And aside from that, he's genuinely one of the nicest, generous people I have ever met and ever had the pleasure of partnering with and working with in my sales enablement and RevOps career. So there you go, Cian. That's you. But I'm going to hand over to you. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about Trinity Solutions, what you do now, when you stepped out of some of those kind of other roles.
Not sure how I'm gonna follow that up. That was such an impressive introduction. I'm sitting there going, did I do all those things? Look, I'm a sales nerd at heart. I think, Danielle, that's the big challenge. The first few years of my career, I found it quite hard to reconcile the fact that I was in sales. And I think a lot of people actually do. We call ourselves account managers. We call ourselves all sorts of different things because the word sales is kind of scary to us. So it took me a few years to sort of come to terms with the fact that not only was I in sales, but actually I was quite enjoying it. And I was, quite proud to be in that kind of career path. And I've been very fortunate to have worked with some, huge companies around the world and carried a quota and managed teams. And then also been lucky enough to support and enable sales teams over the last 12 or 13 years and work with some great sales leaders. So all that side of it is really fascinating. But the thing that kind of keeps me really interested in this profession is I get a sneaky look behind the curtain to actually find out what's influencing customers when they're making their buying decisions. So you kind of mentioned win-loss analysis. I stumbled on this many years ago because I was getting super frustrated in some of my own sales pursuits. We'd get to the end and we'd either get selected or in some cases we wouldn't. And it might have been a 6-month sales cycle, a couple of $100,000 of cost of sale on these multi-million-dollar pursuits. And at the end, we had no real idea what had actually influenced the customer to make their buying decision. So we'd sit around in a meeting room and we would just make shit up. We would just go, I think we didn't have our executive alignment quite right. And someone else would kind of toss in, I think they were always leaning towards Oracle, and someone else would mention price. And we would just come up with this kind of plausible narrative for what had influenced the outcome because we didn't know. And then that would justify all of the time and the effort and the cost of sale we'd just put in over that period of time. And then we just sort of chalk it up to experience and we'd move on to the next one. And I just thought that was the craziest thing in the world. And so I started asking around, talking to people within my own organization and other businesses. I said, how do you do this? And the conclusion I came to was everyone was sitting around in little rooms making shit up because nobody actually knew the answers. And so that was the nut I decided to crack. And 15 years later, almost, where I'm still sort of with the sledgehammer trying to crack the same nut. And it's been fascinating.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I think, like when Lucy and I were looking at different people to invite onto the podcast, you instantly sprung to mind because you came and did a presentation quite a while ago, and some of the insights that you gave around why people are losing some of these deals are not, and it's not the kind of answers that I was expecting, to be honest. There was some real interesting insights, and and I think about the people that are listening to the podcast now, and often, like you said, it can be, what I've heard is, we only really review, the big elephant deals. We only really review the ones that left a gaping hole that we're now going to have to, fix and find more opportunities or bring opportunities forward to try and plug this gap. So, I suppose for the people that are listening, could you, share a little bit more about the process that you kind of have been through? I know there's been advancements in your business, particularly over the past couple of years as well. Anything you can kind of, I suppose, share with some of our listeners would be great.
Yeah, and what I'll try and do as we chat today is I'll try and share stuff that's useful and actionable, not just kind of theory, because that's what it's all about. How can I take this and use it to move the needle in my own sales performance, or in the outcomes I'm getting, or in how I'm interacting with sellers? So, like, the premise is really, really simple. If you've done a good job, you've earned the right to some feedback, in my opinion. And actually, customers agree with that. So I think win-loss analysis, or post-sales debrief, or call it what you want, I think it's the logical final step in the kind of the sales cycle that we're all so used to. It's, kind of prospect at the top end and work people through the funnel. We're falling over in that last mile when we should be saying, irrespective of the outcome, how do I extract some value for the time and the effort and the energy I put in? Like, the three of us know, and everyone listening knows, just how much wastage goes on in the B2B sales world. You get 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different companies all pitching for the same piece of business, all throwing, inordinate amounts of resource and cost of sale at these pursuits. And best case scenario is one of them walks away with something which is a contract, and everyone else kind of chalks it up to experience and leaves. But actually, what happens a lot of the time is, it's a do nothing outcome. Everyone walks away with nothing, and there's just all of this, wasted resource, opportunity cost, etc. So my philosophy is really simple. It's irrespective of the outcome. If we've done a good job, hopefully we've earned the right to get a little bit of feedback. The customer perspective is the most interesting perspective. That's the one I'm most fascinated in. So you just need a mechanism to ask them in an appropriate way to give some candid and constructive feedback that you can take, you can listen to, and then where appropriate, you can take some action and you can actually start to move the needle. So we talk about watching the game tape back, and that's the intent with this. And customers are so super open to it. Like, really, in many cases, they're saying, I'm so glad you asked, because not only is it a professional courtesy, but it's also in their best interest. They don't want businesses that are going to blindly come in and sort of market to them and throw mud against the wall, hope some of it sticks. They're looking for vendors that will listen, that will innovate, that will collaborate, that will do all of those, the things we talk about so often in sales and we rarely actually do. That's what they're striving for as well. So give them some context. Let them know why you're asking these questions, what you're going to use it for, what you're not going to use it for. Make them feel comfortable with the process, and you will be just amazed at how much of a truth serum it becomes in terms of, flushing out honest, candid, actionable insights from those customers.
Excuse me, really interesting. As soon as Danielle started talking about your key, and I was like, I could just grill you and question your brain for hours. I guess if I was a listener and I'm in sales and I've sat in those seats, then there's been a big shift, I think, especially since COVID. We're not in this like win mode anymore. And there's people have got to have so much more pipeline coverage. Like, what do you think are the biggest things, or even like biggest questions or stones being left unturned for the reason that these deals aren't being closed and that they are being lost now to other vendors? Is there kind of any outliers sitting there?
So I think there's two things. There's macro and there's micro. So if we kind of tackle the macro stuff at the moment, deals are taking longer. There's less available budget. There's more scrutiny on spend. There's more reluctance to change. So do nothing is becoming an even bigger kind of competitor than it used to be. risk has jumped to the top of the food chain in terms of decision criteria for a lot of organizations. And unfortunately, a lot of sellers are struggling to have intelligent risk conversations. Incumbents are kind of maintaining their foothold a lot more just purely because it's easier to kind of stick with the status quo. It's, the better the devil you know. So there's a bunch of this stuff happening in a macro sense. I think also, the available budget is being pushed into things like AI and some other stuff, and and cybersecurity as well. And so that's kind of, there's a finite pool, and it's being kind of maybe pushed in slightly different directions. So there's a challenge there. I think SaaS is having a really difficult time at the moment. I think when I talk to SaaS companies, we're saying, think of it more as software with a service than software as a service. Customers need that little bit more, kid gloves, that little bit more support, whether it's onboarding or extracting value from their deliverable. I think customer success has actually kind of jumped to the top of the food chain, almost more important than sellers at the moment, because your capacity to retain and expand existing customers is going to prove even more challenging over the next period of time. So there's all that stuff happening kind of out there in macro land. At a micro level, I think sales is getting worse. I actually genuinely think it's getting worse, which is awful. It's a terrible admission. But I think what's happened is, we've had people who were enterprise sellers, and now that role has been broken up into lots of kind of different component parts. And as a result, I think a lot of individuals aren't getting the investment they used to get in terms of the sales training, in terms of the mentoring and the shadowing and the being allowed to kind of come along and sit on the sidelines before they're given their laptop and they're patching their quota and they're dropped in the deep end. I think it's putting them in this really challenging position where they're actually engaging with more senior stakeholders, and they haven't necessarily got the experience, the longevity, the tenure, the knowledge, and they're feeling, in quite a difficult position. A lot of the stuff that we see, and Danielle kind of made this comment earlier about some of the stuff that I shared at that Salesforce event all those years ago being surprising. There's so much of this is surprising because so much of it relates to the quality of the individuals and the interactions those individuals are having with the customer. And that doesn't really align with, a lot of the stuff that we hear more broadly, which is, it's price and it's feature function and solution. The way I can kind of most simply articulate this is 15 years, if I condense it into one sentence, product and price is important. And Dee's probably heard me say this. It's important at getting you from the long list to the short list. But the quality of your people, the individuals, and the professionalism with which they show up is actually often what gets you from shortlist to being selected as vendor of choice. And that final mile, I think that's where a lot of the sort of the invisible friction is happening in these sales cycles, and where a lot of reps are actually really, really struggling, because they're being asked to hit these kind of, number of call quotas or number of outreach quotas or whatever. And so we're all leaning into automation and these other things to try and expedite what we're doing. But what we're losing the nuance. We're losing the kind of the relevance. We're losing the preparation on the front end and then the follow-up on the back end. And as a result, the whole process is just breaking down. And from an end customer perspective, it's a really crap experience.
Yeah, really interesting. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I mean, I'm really not, like, I'm a bit of a stickler for professionalism. I always have been, and Lucy knows this. Like, I won't let a document go out the door unless it doesn't look great. I won't let a statement of work get in front of someone unless I've crossed the I's and dotted the T's. And and I mean, we can see through it as well. I can see through it. I can see straight through it when there is when an email's been sent to me and it's been done by ChatGPT. Like, we can tell that language now. The amount of emails that I get or emails that I get, and they're talking to me about a solution that has zero relevance to me. It is, and it's just causing more and more just noise. Like, I think it is becoming a lot harder to cut through the noise. And so I think it's really interesting. You talked about the macro and the micro there, and you're constantly doing win-loss reviews. You've been doing them for years and years and years. And so I imagine you see the what's coming up, pretty immediately, really. And, you know,
Yeah,
you could probably compare a win-loss review for one company that you did 12 months ago versus one that you did this month, and you can start to see. And that's really interesting that you're getting that kind of immediate feedback at a point in time as well. And we're not necessarily aggregating it and looking for averages. You're getting the right now a point in time, which is super interesting.
Well, it is. And what's fascinating is, so, you know, if I cast my mind back over, you know, 7 or 8 years, we could look at the kind of the broad trends in B2B as to why you win strategic pursuits, and the broad trends as to why you lose. But in the last 12 months, a bunch of stuff has kind of emerged that wasn't really even on our radar. And so, you know, for the purposes of the, you know, the conversation today, and just for the audience, I'll kind of give you a couple of things that if I was starting out as an SDR, or if I was a rep in, you know, today, here's some of the stuff that I would be doubling down on. So you talked about why the industry is so problematic. If it was me, I would be carving out more time to do a little bit more detailed discovery, right? We all get into this kind of show up and throw up mode, right? We go straight to solution before we've ever taken the time to understand the problem, which makes zero sense. So we've got to fight the urge to talk about our stuff, fight the urge to present our deck, have enough confidence to go in and have an intelligent, open-ended conversation with some context, with some pre-research, but not going in with a foregone conclusion. Because one of the big challenges a lot of reps are starting with is they've got a number that they're being asked to hit. And so they go into every conversation thinking, I must make this a sale, or I must advance this. And ironically, that just creates all this anxiety for themselves and for their prospective customer, and throws the whole thing off. So we've got to kind of go in with, you know, with the heart of a teacher rather than the soul of the salesperson, and go in and say, I don't care. I'm divorcing myself from the outcome, but I'm going to make sure this is a really great interaction, and I'm going to earn the right to move to the next step of the process. Forget about making a sale. I'm just going to earn the right to move to the next step. And so by avoiding that, you show up and you're going, okay, I'm going to show up and I'll have done my research, and I'll be on time, and I'll make sure that my tech is working. So just the basics, the sort of the non-negotiables. On time is late. Just get the basics. And I've got a decent background, and I'm shaved, or my hair's done. Just that goes without saying. And yet it doesn't, because a bunch of people aren't even doing the basics. So let's be honest. Then you do your pre-work. Your pre-work is also about how you interact before that first interaction. So it's the Cialdini persuasion. Like, have I sent an agenda? Have I done some advanced work? Have I checked out who they are? You know, all of that sort of stuff. Again, non-negotiable. Then what's that interaction like? You know, is there a proper engagement? Am I listening? I did some work with a guy who was a seasoned seller, and he said to me, Cian, I'm kind of struggling at the moment. Things aren't quite landing as easily. Could you watch back some of my customer calls? So I was like, yeah, sure. So he recorded them, like the video. And I was watching them. I was like, you seem really unengaged. Like, you seem like totally like you're just waiting for them to stop talking. And he's like, no, that's not the case at all. And I said, well, that's what it came across. So what we sort of realized was he'd stopped taking notes. He no longer took notes. He was just kind of letting it get the transcript, and then he was going back. And so I said, from my perspective, as someone who was, you know, on the other side of that made me feel really uncomfortable. So I said, look, just for sort of shits and giggles, do me a favor for the next week. Just take notes as you go through your meetings. And then, and this is the bit where a lot of people fall down, in the next sort of 20 minutes after a call, like, write those up, and then drop a note to the person you've had the meeting with, and just say, hey, here's what I took away. Probably, you know, missed a couple of things. Please kind of, you know, add in anything I missed. And here's what we talked about in terms of path forward and next steps. It's the linkage between the three different, so it's professional beforehand, professional during, professional afterwards. That linkage just seems to have disappeared. And as a result, we're not getting the progression. So all these deals are getting stalled mid-pipe, and all these people are getting frustrated. And they're like, why is this happening? Yes, some of it is macro, some of it is stuff that's happening, but some of it is controllable. We've got to be looking for, where is this invisible friction and what can we do? And some of it comes just down to how we show up. So Dee, I'm exactly like you. You know, I want the things that go out the door to look good. I want them to be bespoke and tailored. Because here's the funny thing. People will reciprocate back to you the effort that you've put in. So if you're putting in more thought, more effort, more tailoring, it looks the part. They will judge a book by its cover, so they're gonna you know, judge you on that basis. But also, they're going to be much more engaged because it's clear that you're much more engaged. So that's what we have to do. We have to kind of carve out enough time, you know, the 15 minutes before, the 20 minutes afterwards. So instead of doing 6 demos a day, we're doing 4, but our hit rate is going up because the level of interest and engagement and care factor has gone up. This is the stuff I think that if I'm starting out in my sales career, I'm starting to invest in, because otherwise it's just all of this activity for very little return on investment.
I agree. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, completely agree.
One of those things where, and it's businesses, I feel, especially in me and DDH as well, it's like they're implementing enablement, but actually they don't understand enablement. So they're bringing the resource in, but without understanding what it actually is. Therefore, enablement can't execute on what they're doing, because, week 2 into the business, here's your quota, and by the way, it's 3 times more than it was last year. And these guys sometimes haven't even picked up a phone before. So I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. The issue is, I think the businesses then don't align to how to execute on that. And then they're just like, I need to please my boss. I need to, I need my manager to tick off these KPIs. I've done the completed calls the whole time.
Yeah, it's paint by numbers, or it's sell by numbers. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, and I think 3 or 4 years ago that was working, but that's dropping off a cliff now in terms of return on investment. And then what some people are doing is just throwing more and more kind of effort and activity and resource and budget at things that are delivering less and less value. And I've had, and Dee, you probably had this as well, people calling up saying, hey, I've got 50K budget I need to spend from sales enablement. What could you do for us? Like, what do you need? Well, we've got no idea, but we have to spend it this quarter. It's crazy, right? So that's the nice thing about the journey we've been on. Win-loss has this funny way of just kind of shining the light on where the gaps are, where the real frustration is. And then you can point the cannons and say, right, we need to fix this. Forget everything else. We've got a massive issue here. And it might be, quality of discovery. It might be quality of orals or bid management. It might be something much more around commercials. You've got to be focused on what's going to move the needle. And the best way to do that is kind of start with your customer and work back from there versus kind of starting at the other end. So I think that's one of the challenges. But yeah, it's the professionalism piece, which probably sounds a bit sort of antiquated, but you can call yourself a salesperson, but you don't get to call yourself a sales professional. You have to actually earn that professionalism piece, just like any other profession. And I think, unfortunately, in sales, what's happening is a lot of people are getting their laptop and their quota, and they're thinking of themselves as sales professionals. You're not. You're just a salesperson.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I've been in a few some of the engagements that I've been involved with, I would say, over the past 6 to 8 months. There's been this, and I've heard it a lot more than I've heard it before. And I've heard this: the salespeople are lazy. The salespeople are lazy. The salespeople are lazy. And I try and dig into that and like, what is it about? What indicated? Why are you saying your salespeople are lazy? Well, and there's been many answers to that, but consistently I would say it was, they're not hitting the activity targets. Okay. I was like, okay. Then it's, they're not going out and seeing people anymore. Right. I think COVID has definitely put some challenges in that area. And yes, I think there's probably some personal things like, oh, well, actually, I don't really want to leave the house and go out and do these meetings. But then, conversely to that, it's very hard. You're not all in on the same day. People are working from home 2 to 3 days a week. We used to sell in the fantastic Nirvana state where we could get people all in a boardroom or in a meeting room all at the same time. And that is a challenge. And then, just other things, it's just, I don't know, like I've just heard it a lot recently. And I don't know, are we turning people into being lazy because they just expect things to be automated? I don't know. Has that come up at all?
I don't think it's a laziness thing. I think salespeople are really struggling because it's harder to make your number. It's harder to get the meetings. Everything is harder. And what's happening is all of the levers that we used to pull aren't delivering the value anymore. And so, and then you've got these conflicting, salespeople, because some amazing salespeople are out there doing their own research and saying, oh, I'm seeing what other people are doing and listening to one another. And then getting told, well, that's not how we do things in here. And so, I worked at many salespeople, and when I kind of scratch the surface on, tell me what used to make you successful, and they get really energized, and I say, what are you doing now? I don't do any of that now. Yeah, that's not how we do things in here. So you're in some respects like, having an arm tied behind their back and being told, we want you to do all this stuff, and then being berated for not, hitting their number, but they're following the bouncing ball and it's actually not getting them there. And then when they're trying to do things themselves. So I don't think you can make blanket statements about, people being lazy, but I think they're struggling at the moment. I think they're becoming quite disenfranchised with the industry, and a lot of the more senior sellers are disappearing out one end, and it doesn't feel like they're being replaced by the sort of the next level of, caliber of individuals coming through. So we have this kind of gulf that's emerging. And as a result, customers are getting more and more frustrated. And so, they're doing one of two things. They're getting themselves further down the funnel without any sales interaction, or they're going back to people they've interacted with in the past, they've had good engagements with, and saying, like, where are you now? Can you come and help us? So, there's some weird stuff emerging, but I really think companies that are going to maintain their momentum off the back of direct selling have to invest more in their sellers, and also have to invest more for that longer term horizon, not just the, we'll give you, 2 hours of sales enablement and chuck you out in the street kind of thing.
I agree. And by the way, listeners, you know that I don't think you're lazy at all, because I'm incredibly passionate about this profession, as Cian is. I am still a salesperson. I do still make those calls and attend those meetings and take people through a sales process. So, it was just really interesting. And I think there's almost a bit of we've given you everything you need. You've got the best of breed technology. You've got sequencing. You've got the best mobile phone, you've got CRM that you can dictate your notes into. In fact, now we've got AI tools that are going to reprocess the notes for you. But I do feel as if we're all it's just got complicated. We used to have a Yellow Pages and a mobile phone. You used to have a Yellow Pages and a phone. And that was simple, right? I knew I had people to ring and I had a way of doing it. And then we introduced email, and then we introduced InMail, and then we introduced, voicemail and Slack. And, I think, and sequencers, and every company has a different technology stack as well. And I think we buy all of this technology with the best intent that this is going to help and it's going to, speed things up and allow you to do more with less effort. But as you quite rightly said, I think we're diluting a lot of the bespoke, meaningful, well-reasoned outreach that comes from, from actually putting the effort in and doing that.
I think if you were to put, for argument's sake, you were to put, 2 brand new salespeople in a adjoining cubicles, and one of them was to be given the kind of the current accepted onboarding, for a seller, and the other was told, just use your human nature and your best instincts, they would do exponentially better, right? Because actually that's part of the big challenge. Like, so if I'm talking to your audience now, here's what I'm saying: be professional in every interaction with not just with your prospective customers, also with your team. So that's about, because you're not 50% better or 50% worse than your competition. It's always little tiny little increments of 1% and 2% right the way through the engagement. So that's the kind of almost your true north is just, right, I'm going to be professional. I'm going to try and add a little bit of value in each interaction, irrespective of the outcome. I'm going to divorce myself from trying to make a sale. I'm just going to try and earn the right to move to the next step. Then I'd nuance that a little bit and I'd say risk is a key decision criteria. If you can become the low risk option in the eyes of your customer, that's going to put you in a very strong position, particularly if they're looking to move from an incumbent, because incumbency has all of these other challenges in terms of, like, the change management, the cost of change, the risk. Risk is not just organizational. Risk is personal. There's someone on the other side of the fence who this will either look good or look bad to. So cultural fit and risk come up again and again. The other thing I would say, and these are all things that are within your control now, it's not, structural stuff that you can't deal with, is the quality and the depth of your discovery plus how responsive you are directly will correlate to how successful you are, right? Do better discovery, play that back to the people you've been speaking to. I heard this and, my understanding was this, and I probably missed a little bit of this. So please, give them permission to tweak that for you, but be responsive, like, almost under promise and over deliver from a responsiveness perspective. And then to Dee's point, make sure everything that leaves your desk, everything that goes out the door just looks professional. You've sent it. Like we had a situation, and I won't name any names. I'll never do that. But we had a situation where one of my consulting teams did a loss review, and the customer said, "This isn't the reason we didn't pick this vendor, but if we'd been leaning towards them, this would have been the reason." And my consultant was like, "What do you mean?" And the customer said, "Can I share my screen?" So the customer shared their screen and said, "Here's the document we received from them. It was a tender response. Somebody had turned on track changes and written, 'I've just made up these case studies.' And someone else responded, 'That's okay, just put them in anyway.' And then they PDF that and sent that to the client." We see this stuff all the time. So to lose a deal for something unprofessional is not great. To lose it for something unethical is pretty terrible. That was the double whammy. So they combine those two. But here's what's happening. If we park the unethical stuff, and it does happen, unfortunately, but just look at the unprofessional. Usually it's because we're all so busy. So our resources are getting stretched too thin. And what's happening is things are falling through the cracks. So we're taking a document and we're doing a search and replace on an old client, putting in the new client's name because it's quicker. But then we miss where it was capitalized and somewhere and it wasn't. So now they're reading about a different client in the same document. And all the work you've done, all the effort to build up that, it's killed in one moment of like lack of professionalism. We see this stuff happening all the time. Mm-hmm. So this is what I mean by you're not going to be 50% better or worse. It's just fighting for these little increments and pushing back on your management team and saying, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to give myself 20 minutes between meetings to capture my thoughts, to play that back, to set an expectation, to be responsive, because actually that's going to deliver a far better outcome." Because making calls is not the end. It's a means to an end. It's not an end in itself, unless that's your only kind of metric. So that's what I would be leaning into if I was starting out in my career now.
Yeah, I agree. I like that a lot. For businesses that haven't used your services before and kind of want to go away after this and start implementing something for themselves, for like a win-loss,
yep.
Or go to their leader and go, "Hey, like, can we actually start doing this as a team?" Yep. What's your like best recommendations for them to go and start doing that?
So thank you for the lovely plug, Lucy. I'll take that. There's 3 ways. Right, the first one is you can reach out to me and I'll tell you how to do this internally in your business. You don't necessarily need an independent third party. Having a third party makes sense if your deals are a certain value, or you want to give the customer that little bit of separation to make sure that they're being really candid and honest and constructive with you. So anyone who thinks this is going to be interesting, but either their business is too small or it's not appropriate, they're welcome to reach out to me and I'll give them a bunch of stuff that'll get them off to the races and they can start to build their own internal program. For our clients, effectively, we do it 2 ways. We have a consulting team that we use for kind of large strategic pursuits, and we actually interview key stakeholders on the customer side. You introduce us in, and then we take it from there, and we introduce them. We interview them, we interpret all that, and we go back to you and say, "This is what they told us. Here's our findings. Here's our recommendations. Here's what we think you should do in the business," and then potentially even support you downstream in terms of executing. For companies that have smaller deals, we have a SaaS offering that effectively does like a mini version of the more in-depth win-loss review. But importantly, it still captures quantitative and qualitative feedback from the customers. Because I'm interested to know how you rate us and score us, but I'm fascinated to hear in your own words, like, how did we show up? How did we differentiate? What worked for you? Where did we miss the mark? You've earned the right to that feedback, in my opinion, if you've done a good job. You just need a mechanism to take it off the table. So yeah, we can kind of help out in any of those 3 ways.
Yeah, you just need to ask sometimes. Hey, just a quick question, Cian. So I'm a stickler. A lot of the work that I've done recently is around qualification and disqualification in a deal. I think we've got a lot of bloated pipeline at the moment. Often that can be due to, particularly when it's a new financial year and we're sorting out books of business and who owns what, and people want to keep opportunities in their name and things like that. But when is it a true win-loss review? Like, is it at any stage in the cycle? Is it when you've at least presented a solution and some commercials? Like, when would you say like a win-loss review is a true win-loss review?
It's a great question. And I think if you'd asked me that 5 years ago, I probably would have given a different answer. The way we work now is for a bunch of our clients, you've been given an answer on the deal. So either you won, you lost, or they've decided it's a do nothing outcome. That kind of is the the broad win-loss definition. So a pursuit has just ended, and you want to get some feedback on that particular pursuit. So you should be asking during the sales cycle, setting an expectation that you want to do a debrief, and then within a couple of weeks of the deal being closed, it's when you actually conduct the review. There's a little kind of window of opportunity either side, but broadly, that's what I would say. Increasingly, what we're seeing is there's a lot of our clients who have had churn, or they want to mitigate the risk of churn in their install base, because now it's more about just, kind of customer success and adoption, or they want to expand mind share or wallet share. So over the last 5 years, increasingly, we've done more and more value realization reviews for existing customers at a certain trigger point in their customer lifecycle, either to de-risk churn, 12, 18 months out from a contract being renewed, or in fact to help, expand the relationship. So that's sort of, end of the sales cycle is win-loss, midpoint in the customer life cycle you'd call value realization. And on occasion, we actually get pulled in while a deal is still in pursuit, where a company wants to de-risk a really strategic pursuit, because we have all of these insights from 15 years probably of B2B win-loss reviews from deals, from 50K to 50 million. And there's a bunch of commonality. And so they're saying, use that as a lens to look at our deal and help us de-risk it, find out where the cracks are, because we can't afford to lose these pursuits. So you can apply the insights at different stages of the sales cycle, but the classic win-loss usually is shortly after a deal has been concluded.
Yeah, amazing. And so I know that we're kind of coming up on time here, and I could keep talking to you for hours and hours and hours all day. So just to kind of wrap things up. So we talked about a few things here. So in terms of advice, slowing down to speed up, like making sure that you are double checking, triple checking, get that discovery right, doing all of your preparation, taking that time, despite the targets that are hovering over our head, when you are execute well, execute professionally. And then,
let me give you another one.
another
one quickly.
Go.
Let me give you quickly on this. Just find a way to bring your customer more inside the sales cycle, I think is a really important thing. So validate things as you're going through. Like one of the things I will always do is, if I have an internal sponsor and we're going to do a dry run before we do a presentation, I'll ask them to attend the dry run. So, you're very welcome to come. We're going to dry run it anyway. Or I'll send them a draft of our commercial proposal before we finalize it and ask them to redline it and poke some holes in it. Look for ways to because quite often the internal sponsor, like, they're trying to deliver an outcome to someone else in their organization. So my advice would be, don't just focus on your customer, focus on your customer's customer. Get really clear on who are they trying to deliver an outcome for, and get around their side of the table. So now you're jointly trying to deliver an outcome to this other internal stakeholder, because that will change the whole dynamics of the sales cycle. Sorry to cut across your teeth.
No, that's perfect. I was going to say, give me one final one. So that's really, really great. Yeah, I think we don't have to work in silos. Like, we don't have to be tracking along a different process. And also, again, it's, as you said, it's that validation all the way along. Are we actually at the same point? Are we talking the same language? Is this the right time to be presenting to these people, and why? So no, I love it. I really love it. Cian, it has been an absolute pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us and for taking the time. We will absolutely be putting links out to your website and things like that. So if anybody is interested in discussing this with Cian, or would even like to look at potentially engaging Trinity Perspectives into their business, then we encourage you to, because he's amazing.
Well, thank you. I feel very honored. Thank you so much. First guest on the show. And the last thing from my side is, I am working on a new book, but until that comes out, if any of your listeners would like a copy, I'll send a soft copy to anyone who contacts you. So yeah.